Complex topics and loads of sources to bring you the core insights, helping you get genuinely informed.
And today, we have a really fascinating one. We're looking at someone you think you know, Sir Isaac Newton.
Right, the gravity guy, the calculus guy, the apple, all that.
Exactly. But what if I told you that same mind, the one that basically unlocked the physics of the heavens, also spent, well, arguably more time trying to unlock ancient prophecies?
Wow, okay. That's definitely not the Newton from my physics class.
Not at all. He believed his deepest insights weren't just in math or gravity, but hidden in the Bible, particularly Daniel and Revelation. And his ideas, this blend of science and theology, they actually feel surprisingly relevant today, with all our own anxieties about truth and belief.
So that's our mission for this deep dive then, to kind of uncover this hidden side of Newton and see how it connects to, well, to us now.
Precisely. We're going to journey through his less-known prophetic work, but also connect it back to his groundbreaking science, especially his book Optics. We'll look at light matter perception.
And then pivot to more modern thinkers. I see McLuhan and Young mentioned in our sources. How do they fit in?
Well, their ideas about identity, collective belief, even how our financial system works. They echo Newton's concerns in some really striking ways. It's all about understanding the power of belief, ancient and modern, and maybe finding some clarity for ourselves.
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's dive in. Part one, Newton, the seer, the scientist. Where do we even start with Newton and prophecy? It seems so unexpected.
It really does. But yeah, she dedicated decades to it. And the first thing you need to grasp is his view on why prophecy exists. He was adamant, really emphatic, that it was not given to satisfy our curiosity about the future.
So not like a crystal ball then.
Definitely not. He actually called people who tried to use it that way interpreters, engaged in folly. He thought it brought the whole concept of prophecy into contempt when their predictions failed.
Okay, so if it's not for predicting, what was the point, according to Newton?
Well, for him, the purpose was much grander, much more about divine proof. He believed prophecies were designed so that after they were fulfilled, people could look back at the event.
And see the prophecy matched it.
Exactly. And that, he argued, would manifest God's providence, showing that history wasn't random chaos, but part of a divine plan. The ultimate goal wasn't just knowing the future. It was, and this is a quote, affecting a recovery and reestablishment of a long-lost truth and setting up a kingdom wherein dwells righteousness. Pretty profound stuff.
Long lost truth. That's intriguing. And he focused on specific books, right? Daniel and Revelation?
Yes, heavily. He saw them as sealed books, particularly Daniel. Daniel was actually commanded to shut up and seal his prophecies till the time of the end. Newton took this literally.
Meaning they weren't meant to be fully understood until when?
Until the last age of the world, as he put it. He even argued that the fact people couldn't perfectly understand them yet actually added to their credibility. It proved they were genuinely sealed, waiting for the right time.
So how does the understanding happen then in this time of the end? Does it just appear?
Well, he pointed to a specific verse, predicting that in that time, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. He saw this as an era of discovery, not just scientific, but theological discovery, unlocking these very mysteries.
So if people today see connections between ancient texts and current events, what some call biblical aligning, Newton might have said, well, yeah, knowledge is increasing.
That seems to be exactly his line of thinking. It's a natural unfolding part of the plan, this increase in understanding as we approach that time of the end.
Okay, this brings us to the famous number, 2060. Everyone hears that and thinks Newton predicted the apocalypse.
Right, and that's the big misconception. It stems from a private note, something he scribbled down, never meant for publication.
And how did he even get to 2060?
He was working with a time frame mentioned in Daniel and Revelation, 1,260 days, which he, like many interpreters of his time, read as 1,260 years.
Okay, 1,260 years, starting from when?
This is the crucial part. He added it to the year 800 AD.
800 AD. Why that specific year?
Well, 800 AD was historically significant. It's when Charlemagne was crowned emperor, marking a kind of revival of the Roman Empire in the West and a new phase of, let's say, papal influence or temporal power for the church, which Newton linked to certain prophecies.
So 800 plus 1260 equals 2060. But, and this is key, he didn't think it was the end of the world.
Absolutely not. For Newton, 2060 wasn't destruction. It was a new beginning. It was the approximate time he calculated for the start of the millennium, that 1,000-year reign of Christ or the Messianic age. A positive transformation, not an ending.
And it was just a private thought, a calculation.
Exactly, a personal speculative calculation. You have to remember, he openly criticized people who made firm date predictions. He thought it damaged Christianity's reputation when days passed and nothing happened, quoting the Bible, "No man knows the day or the hour."
So the 2060 note was more like establishing a boundary, an earliest possible time.
Precisely. More like, based on this interpretation, it couldn't really start before this time, rather than, this is the exact date. It was about setting a minimum time frame, not a deadline.
But this starting point, 800 AD, you said it was linked to Charlemagne, but was that the only possible starting point he could have picked from history? It feels a bit chosen, you know.
That's a really sharp observation, and it gets to the heart of interpreting prophecy in history. 800 AD made sense within his framework, linking to his understanding of the little horn power in Daniel and the rise of certain church-state dynamics. But was it the only significant turning point in that whole period? Probably not.
So here's the thought experiment then, building on Newton's own idea that prophecies are understood after the event. What if 800 AD wasn't the right starting point for that 1260-year clock?
Go on.
What if there was another, maybe earlier historical event that, with our hindsight, seems like a more significant marker for the beginning of whatever that 1260-year period represented?
Okay, I see where you're going. If you started the clock earlier.
Then the 1260 years might end, well, much closer to our time. Could that explain why some people today feel like they're seeing biblical patterns unfold right now? Could an earlier, equally valid starting point give us that McLuhan-esque 30 years warning Newton thought prophecy provided after the fact, but applied to our present?
That's a fascinating way to frame it. It shifts the focus from Newton's specific date to the process of interpretation itself, using his own methodology but potentially different historical anchors. It suggests that the biblical aligning isn't about his prediction, but maybe about the inherent patterns he was trying to decode, finally becoming clearer now, perhaps suggesting a different timeline was ticking all along.
Exactly. It respects his method but questions the specific anchor point, because he was incredibly meticulous otherwise, wasn't he, in his actual historical mapping?
Oh, absolutely systematic. He didn't see Daniel and Revelation as separate stories. For him, they were but one complete prophecy. He believed Revelation was essentially the unfolding or the interpretation of Daniel's sealed visions.
And he connected them to real history, not just vague ideas.
Incredibly specific. His method was all about mapping the symbols, the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, the beasts in Revelation onto concrete historical events, primarily the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, the powers that came after it.
Like what? Can you give an example of that mapping?
Sure. He meticulously detailed the invasions of the Western Roman Empire, starting around 407 AD. The Visigoths, Vandals, Alans, Sueves, Burgundians, Ostrogoths. He saw these as fulfilling the prophecies that broke the empire into 10 kingdoms. He pointed to Odoacer deposing the last Western emperor in 476 AD as a key prophetic marker.
Wow, okay. That's detailed.
Very. And he got even more granular. Remember the plague of the southern wind you asked about earlier?
Yeah.
He linked that, the third trumpet sound in Revelation, specifically to Genseric, the Vandal king, invading North Africa in 427 AD and later sacking Rome in 455 AD, which led to the devastation and depopulation of Roman Africa. He saw a direct cause and effect link described centuries earlier.
It's kind of staggering to think of him correlating troop movements and plagues with verses from Revelation.
It really is. It shows this deep conviction that history was the unfolding text of God's plan. He also connected the Saracen conquest starting around 634 AD to the descriptions of swarms of locusts in Revelation.
Okay.
And then the rise of the Turkish Empire, particularly their conquest from around 1258 AD onwards, culminating in the fall of Constantinople. He linked that to the 6th trumpet, the 4 angels bound at the great river Euphrates.
Did he use dates for that one too?
Oh, yes. He calculated a period of 391 prophetic days, interpreting them as years, running from 1063 AD to 1453 AD, the very year Constantinople fell to the Turks. It's this level of detailed alignment that demonstrates how seriously he took this project. It wasn't just a hobby.
And it wasn't just about the past either, right? You mentioned his interest in the Jerusalem temple.
That's right. He studied its ancient measurements, believed strongly it would be rebuilt in the future. He wrote quite a bit about the Jewish people returning to their land, envisioning a double return and a future glorious third temple. This belief in literal future fulfillment was also shared by William Whiston, his successor at Cambridge.
So his prophetic view stretched from the fall of Rome right into a future restoration. It's an incredibly comprehensive, if unconventional, view of history.
It truly is. And what's amazing is how this same mind, immersed in ancient texts and timelines, was simultaneously revolutionizing physics with his other great work, optics.
Published in 1704, and you said it was quite different from his Principia Mathematica.
Yeah, in style and approach. For one, it was published in English first, not Latin, which made it much more accessible. It reads almost like a manual of experiments.
So less abstract theory, more show and tell.
Exactly. He explicitly said his goal was not to explain the properties of light by hypotheses, but to propose and prove them by reason and experiments. He wanted you, the reader, to basically see the proof for yourself.
And the big proof was the prism experiment, right? Showing white light isn't pure.
That was foundational, demonstrating that white light disperses into a spectrum of colors, proving colors weren't just modifications of white light or mixtures with darkness, as Aristotle thought, but fundamental components of the light itself. White light was the mixture, a total game changer.
And he also had ideas about what light was made of.
He did. He proposes corpuscular theory that light consists of tiny particles, little corpuscles. Now, we know light is more complex with wave-particle duality and photons, but the idea of light having a particle-like nature was incredibly insightful for the time. It pointed towards quantum ideas centuries later.
But optics wasn't just about the physics of light, was it? It went somewhere deeper, philosophical.
Yeah, absolutely. This is where it connects profoundly back to perception and belief. Newton made this astonishing claim for his time. Color, he said, is a sensation within the mind and not an inherent property of material objects or of light itself.
Hold on, so the redness of an apple isn't in the apple?
Not according to Newton. It's in your mind. He explained that light rays merely have a disposition, a tendency to stir up a sensation in what he called the sensorium, basically our sensory processing system, our consciousness. Objects just reflect certain rays more effectively.
So the apple reflects the red-making rays, and our mind creates the experience of red.
Precisely. He saw it as sensations of those motions under the forms of colors happening within us. This was a really early, sophisticated dive into the mind-body problem, into the nature of subjective experience, what philosophers call qualia.
And he even tried to explain how we see white light.
Yeah, he theorized that if different color sensations hit the sensorium rapidly one after another, they get confounded or mixed together, producing the single sensation of white. It's an early glimpse into sensory integration, how our brain builds our reality from incoming signals.
Amazing. And this leads to the queries at the end of Optics.
Yes, the third book ends with these famous queries. They started at 16 questions, grew to 31 in later editions, and they went way beyond just optics.
What kind of things did he ask?
All sorts. The nature and transmission of heat, the possible cause of gravity, electrical phenomena, chemical action, even the way in which God created matter. Questions like, is not light a body? Show him probing the fundamental nature of reality.
And some of these questions were almost prophetic themselves, weren't they, in a scientific sense?
Uncannily so. Query 30 asks, are not gross bodies and light convertible into one another? That's basically asking if matter and energy are interchangeable. It stunningly anticipates Einstein's immensity cut by over 200 years.
Wow. Any others?
Well, Query 6 asks about how black bodies absorb heat from light. That concept became absolutely central to Max Planck's work on energy quantization, which essentially launched quantum mechanics. And his work on prism arrays laid groundwork for later developments in spectroscopy and even tunable lasers, which are based on quantum principles.
So looking at optics, it wasn't just physics for him. It was like using light to understand everything. Creation, consciousness, God.
That's exactly the feeling you get. For Newton, studying light was a way to understand the universe's deepest architecture, how it was made, and how we even perceive it. One of our sources puts it beautifully. The chemistry of consciousness and the chemistry of nature is intertwined and complex, and the idea of where one stops and the other begins is folly. Newton seemed to live that idea. He saw it all as one integrated system.
That's a perfect bridge, actually, because that idea of interconnectedness, or the lack of it, seems central to the modern issues our sources bring up next. Let's move into part 2. The modern predicament, identity, belief, and, well, sounds like societal self-sabotage.
It does sound grim, and some of these analyses are quite pointed. We start with Marshall McLuhan, the media guru, and his rather stark definition of violence.
What was his take?
He defined violence primarily as, quote, the form of the quest for identity.
Violence is a quest for identity. That's a heavy idea. What does that mean?
He argued that when people or whole cultures lose their sense of self, their self-image, it creates this deep disturbance, anger, frustration. And that lashes out as violence. It's a desperate attempt to feel real, to reestablish boundaries, to know who you are again.
And what did he think was causing this loss of identity?
Electric media, the telephone, radio, TV. He argued they create a discarnate or disembodied intelligence. We're connected instantly, globally, at the speed of light, but we feel detached outside of the natural scheme of things. This leads, he thought, to a kind of moral anarchy, a disconnection from older embodied morals and natural law.
Can you see signs of that? Did McLuhan point to examples?
He did. He saw things like widespread nostalgia in music, fashion, everywhere, as an attempt to get back to the time when we had bodies and identities, a yearning for solidity. He even interpreted things like people dressing as clowns, international motley, or shrieking as bizarre manifestations of grievance and anger linked to a fundamental lack of jobs and goals, a lack of purpose and identity. A warning sign.
A 30 years warning, as the source puts it, a prediction of deeper trouble.
Exactly. And this widespread identity confusion, this feeling that nobody knows who they are, creates the perfect conditions for something Carl Jung warned about: the eruption of the collective shadow.
Jung's collective shadow, that's part of the collective unconscious, right? These deep, shared, often darker archetypes.
Precisely. Jung believed that when society is destabilized and identities are fragile, these powerful archetypes can flood our conscious minds, our egos, and they bring with them this uncommonly strong and totally unshakable feeling of rightness and righteousness.
That's not rational.
Not at all. The source says this feeling is totally irrational, yet feels undisputed and indisputable. It erects a wall that blocks out external reality. Facts, logic, evidence, they just bounce off. And, crucially, the cause of the unease gets projected outwards, blamed on scapegoats. This helps explain these huge self-destructive societal patterns we sometimes see, where large groups seem caught in a grip of irrational belief.
Like a shared delusion.
The sources actually use the term cultural folie à deux, a shared madness. It describes a scenario where a primary mouthpiece, maybe a charismatic leader, broadcasts a simple, compelling myth about what's wrong, and a receptive audience, desperate for answers and identity, just latches onto it, mirrors it. The delusion gets mistaken for compassion or strength or truth, and it spreads. A really chilling mechanism.
And this power of collective belief or delusion connects directly to our financial system. That seems like a leap.
It might seem like one, but think about it. The sources argue our financial system runs on something very similar to hyperstition.
Hyperstition? What's that?
It's like a fictional idea or story that, because people believe in it and act on it, actually makes itself real. And money, the source bluntly states, is nothing more than strips of power that are only valuable because of the belief that they are.
So the value isn't inherent. It's purely based on collective agreement.
Largely, yes. The entire system runs on something far more fragile and far more shocking: credit created out of thin air. It's described as a charade that only holds up because we all believe it works. Think about economic forecasts. They often become self-fulfilling just because people react to them. If that collective faith wavers,
The whole thing could unravel. Wow.
and the sources point specifically to banks. Commercial banks, they claim, create 95–98% of our money out of nothing, simply by issuing loans. This constant creation of money out of thin air is identified as a major driver of the boom-and-bust business cycle.
So instability is almost built into the system through this belief-based money creation.
That's the argument, and it extends to geopolitics, too. Central banks, operating somewhat outside direct democratic control, can provide governments with virtually unlimited war chests by creating money through fiat credit and inflation. This allows governments to wage longer, more drawn-out, and vastly more destructive wars because they're removing the natural limits on state violence. Spending gets severed from accountability. It's financing destruction, often hidden from direct public view.
And that connects back to Newton.
Disturbingly, yes. It echoes his warnings in Revelation about the merchandise of the corrupt system he called Babylon, which included not just goods, but bodies and souls of men. There's a sense of historical continuity in how belief and financial systems can be used for control.
Which leads us right into the manipulation of collective narratives for political power.
Yes, the sources point to examples like Donald Trump's challenges to historical narratives, especially around slavery and diversity in the U.S. This is framed as an assault on history at its center, part of a project to impose a specific, deeply white nationalist identity.
Trying to create a fixed, simplified story of who we are.
Exactly. A simplified, static national self-image, rejecting the idea of a nation constantly striving to be more perfect, constantly evolving. It defines the we by suppressing uncomfortable pros of the past, aspects of that collective shadow we talked about.
And targeting things like wokeness or universities.
That taps into the same dynamic, channeling anxieties about change and perceived loss of traditional identity into a culture war, blaming specific groups or institutions for the unease. It leverages that identity crisis McLuhan diagnosed.
So how do you counter that kind of manipulation, according to these sources?
One interesting idea comes from Stafford Beer, a cybernetician, and his concept of the efficiency of inefficiency.
Efficiency of inefficiency sounds like a paradox.
It means that things like checks and balances, debate, even bureaucracy in a free society, things that seem inefficient, are actually vital features, not bugs. They deliberately slow things down to prevent rash decisions and abuses of power, pushing back against a potentially oppressive drive for simplistic efficiency.
So value the checks and balances. What else?
The sources call for linguistic honesty, basically calling out misleading language, constitutional literacy, knowing the rules of the system, and interpretive disobedience. A principled refusal to just accept distorted narratives. It's about active intellectual defense.
A defense of meaning itself, in a way. Which brings us to the final and maybe most challenging part, the sixth sense, unbelief, and the pursuit of truth.
Right. This section offers a really provocative framework for understanding belief and unbelief.
How does it define unbelief? Because this says it's not just a choice.
Exactly. It defines unbelief as an incapacity, an inability of the skeptical mind to accept or even comprehend phenomena in the supernatural sphere. Things like a personal God, miracles, prophecy, divine inspiration, even effective prayer. It's framed not as rejection, but as a lack of the necessary faculty to perceive.
An incapacity, that's a strong claim. Is it saying all skeptics just can't understand?
The source distinguishes this profound incapacity, which it suggests is quite rare, from the honest doubter who is still searching. It does, however, link certain historical movements, specifically the German higher criticism of the Bible, to what it calls unadulterated infidelity.
Wow. What does it mean by that?
It argues that this school of thought was built on crude theories and baseless assertions designed to set conscience asleep. It claims these critics started from a position of absolute unbelief and essentially constructed interpretations that confirmed their pre-existing lack of belief, like building a cardboard palace with no foundation. It's a very critical take, framing that specific intellectual tradition as stemming from this core incapacity.
Okay, that's a controversial view. How does it try to justify this idea of incapacity?
It uses a striking medical analogy, comparing it to sensory deficiencies. We experience the world through our five senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, touch, right. And we know these senses can have issues, abnormalities, deficiencies. Think about color blindness.
Right, someone might not be able to distinguish red from green, for example.
Exactly. They see shades of gray where others see vibrant color. It's due to missing cells or chemical issues in the eye or neural pathway. And often, the person isn't fully aware of what they're missing. Or consider music deafness, amusia.
Someone who can't recognize tunes, even if their hearing is generally fine.
Correct. They can't distinguish pitch differences well. It's traced to underdeveloped nerve cells in the brain's auditory center. They hear sound, but not music in the way others do.
Okay, so these are real biological limitations in perception. How does this connect to unbelief?
Here's the bold step. The source proposes we should boldly regard the faculty by which we are enabled to believe in God as man's sixth sense.
A sixth sense, a religious faculty.
Yes, a sense of the unseen. It argues this faculty is actually universal, found across cultures, even in so-called savage tribes, once you get past language barriers. It suggests it's a fundamental part of being human.
So following the analogy, an atheist would be.
The source describes a real atheist or total unbeliever as a man born God-blind or God-deaf. They are literally no more capable of perceiving or accepting the supernatural than a profoundly music-deaf person can appreciate a symphony, or a completely colorblind person can critique a painting's color palette. And crucially, like the colorblind person, they are equally insensible of his loss. They don't know what they're missing because they lack the equipment to perceive it.
That's quite a way to frame it. Does it account for different levels of skepticism?
Yes, it extends the analogy. Just as sight and hearing can have partial defects, it suggests there are similar partial defects in the unbelieving individual. This spectrum, it claims, explains the various shades of unbelief. Atheism being total blindness, deafness, while deism, believing in God but not miracles, revelation, agnosticism, rationalism, materialism, etc., represent partial deficiencies in this sixth sense.
Okay, if it's a sense, can it be developed? Or are people just stuck with the equipment they have?
The analogy continues here too. The basic machinery for a sense is completely absent from birth. The force suggests only a real miracle could create it. However,
Yes.
for minor cases of deficiency, where the faculty is just rudimentary or underdeveloped, it argues that careful and persevering training can cultivate it. It places responsibility on us, saying every good gift God gives is left in our own hands to develop.
So it leaves room for change or growth for some. How would you even train this sense?
The source doesn't detail the training, but suggests how to approach an honest unbeliever. You'd use this reasonable analogy, suggesting faith is like a special sense they might be deficient in. Their certainty based purely on reason, without considering this potential sensory lack, is likened to the colorblind person confidently declaring colors don't exist based on their own limited perception.
Implying intellectual humility requires considering possibilities beyond one's own direct experience.
Exactly. It argues true humility involves weighing the accumulated testimony of countless millions of Christians throughout history, acknowledging a vast data set of experiences that one's own senses might not be registering.
And what about miracles? How does this framework handle those? Does it just say believe?
Interestingly, no. It offers a view that might resonate even with Newton. It suggests miracles aren't suspensions of natural law, but are actually performed through the operation of these very laws, just guided by the divine hand that established those laws in the first place. It allows for divine action within a consistent natural order.
So it tries to reconcile divine intervention with scientific law, in a sense.
It does seem to aim for that synthesis. And ultimately, it all circles back to that core idea we touched on with Newton. The chemistry of consciousness and the chemistry of nature is intertwined and complex, and the idea of where one stops and the other begins is folly.
That quote really seems to tie everything together. Newton's science, his prophecy work, the modern struggles with belief and identity, even this sixth sense idea. It's all pointing to a deep, perhaps mysterious connection between our inner world and the outer universe.
It suggests Newton's holistic approach, seeing science, God, and consciousness as interconnected, wasn't just a quirk of his time, but perhaps a reflection of a fundamental truth about reality itself, a truth we might be struggling to grasp today.
Wow. Okay, what an incredible arc. We've gone from Newton decoding revelation and splitting light with prisms right through to McLuhan's warnings about media, Jung's collective shadow, hyperstition in finance, and this really provocative idea of unbelief as a sensory lack.
It's quite a journey. We saw Newton meticulously linking prophecy to history, believing it revealed truth after the fact. We saw his scientific queries in optics, almost predicting future physics, and his deep thoughts on how we perceive color only in our minds. And then, how those themes of belief, identity, and perception play out in our modern anxieties and systems.
The common thread really seems to be the immense power of belief. Whether it's Newton seeing God's providence in history, the collective belief holding up financial systems, the dangerous grip of ideological belief Jung described, or even the proposed sixth sense for perceiving the divine.
Absolutely. Newton, the ultimate natural philosopher, seemed to understand that grasping the universe required understanding not just its mechanics, but its purpose, its meaning, and our conscious experience within it. It's a unified vision that really challenges how we often separate science, spirit, and society today.
So here's a final thought to leave you with, tying back to that challenging sixth sense idea. If we entertain just for a moment the possibility that the capacity to perceive the spiritual or supernatural is a kind of faculty, like sight or hearing, what does that imply?
How might it change how we think about personal responsibility for what we believe, or what genuine intellectual humility looks like? Does it open up the possibility of cultivating a deeper, maybe more complete human experience?
And bringing it right back to now. In our time where McLuhan might say, nobody knows who they are, and Newton predicted knowledge shall be increased, what long-lost truths, as Newton put it, might we still need to uncover? And what role could cultivating your own potential sixth sense, your own capacity for perceiving deeper meaning play in that recovery? Something to ponder.